Hello and welcome back to the Lutheran Witness podcast. I'm your host, Roy Askins. Here today, we have something really special. We're doing a crossover with Coffee Hour. So we have with us today Andy Bates from KFUO. How are you doing, Andy?
I'm doing well. Good morning, good afternoon. Depends on when you're listening.
Yeah, whenever you're listening. Good to you. Good to you, Andy. Today we have something very special. In addition to being a crossover podcast with KFUO, we have the Rev Dr John Sias. How are you doing, Dr. Sias?
Just fine.
Dr. Sias is Secretary of Synod.
Allegedly,
so I've been told. And today we are going to do a very deep dive on nominations in the LCMS. Now, there's a need for nominations. I told Andy Bates, he said I can't say this online, so I'm going to, he told me I couldn't say this, so I'm going to say it. It's the gateway drug to all things Synod. And will help people understand how the broader Synod operates when we talk about nominations. Largely in connection with conventions and elections. So this is really an important topic, Sias, right now, Dr. Sias, for what we're dealing with, for what you're dealing with right now.
Timely, exactly.
Yeah. So what's going on? Why is this particularly timely right now?
Well, it's particularly timely because we have just finished in our suite of district conventions electing the Committee for Convention Nominations, which is the body that's charged with receiving all the nominations and evaluations material to determine who will be on the slates at the 2026 convention in Phoenix in late July of 26 for all the offices, boards, and commissions of the Synod except for the president and vice presidents. So all the officers other than the president and vice presidents is the secretary. That's the only one that's there. But then your board of directors, your mission boards, boards of the Synod-wide corporate entities that elect at the convention, seminaries, colleges, universities, and then the Commission on Theology Church Relations. So all these important functions rely on nominations that will be processed by that committee. And in order for that committee to get them and process them, they have to be submitted by the middle of October.
Do you have a hard deadline? What's the hard deadline there, Dr. Sias?
We do. That hard deadline is going to be October 18th.
Okay, so
which is 9 months prior to the opening of the convention.
Oh, okay. Wow, 9 months. That's a great range of months
there.
Yeah. Okay, so give us an idea. How many positions are being nominated for?
There are roughly 60 positions up for nomination. It varies a little bit from convention to convention because some of the positions are for 6-year terms, so there are alternations that occur. Some of the positions we only do every other time because of that, because they're not staggered terms. And there's always a possibility that the convention could add a position here or there. And I have it on good authority that there may be a position added on one of the Synod-wide corporate entity boards elected by the convention, just to kind of balance out the number that's there. So I'll be advising our Committee for Convention Nominations to prepare an extra in the jump seat for that one, should the convention go that direction.
So how many so you have roughly 60 positions, potentially an extra position in there. How many nominations would you like to see from the people of the LCMS to fill those spots?
So this is sort of the shocking piece. We got those 60 or some positions to fill. We require the committee to find 2 candidates for each one of those positions. So that gets you to a pool of about 120 people if you only have 2, which in some cases there are more for extremely popular positions like secretary. We get a whole bunch of people that want that job. Half may be nuts, but no aspersions to current occupants. But for other positions there may be fewer. But for a lot you'd wish to have more than 2, and sometimes we even wind up with people overlapping. One person that winds up on 2 ballots or sometimes even 3 ballots, and they can't do all 3 because they're limited to being elected to 1 spot. So, 120 is the very bare minimum number of people that you'd have to have. We get, at our last convention, I look back at the numbers a little bit, we got maybe 450 total nominations for the 60 or 70 positions that were open at that time. About 350 of those were willing to go into the nomination process, to be considered even to be put on a ballot of some sort. And then, about 140-ish, 150 of those actually wound up getting used on the ballots that were presented to the convention. The other ones go into the pool, which is something we can talk about a little bit too. And there are other reasons the pool is important. But to me, it's a little bit shocking. I mean, we've got still, 1.3 or so million confirmed members out there in the Synod, 5,800 congregations, 5,200-ish parishes, and every person in every pew, even the kids, if you want to, I guess, give them crayons and get them to my form, could submit nominations for any of these positions in the Synod. So, there's a pool of 1.3 million potential nominators, 5,800 congregations that could sit down and talk about this and find somebody to send me for one of these positions. And we get about 350 usable nominations.
So I want to say this again, just to make sure I understand this correctly. Any member of an LCMS congregation, so not members of Synod, but members of an LCMS congregation. And do you have to have your pastor sign on the dotted line or something?
No.
So any member of an LCMS congregation can nominate.
Right. All we ask, there's an online form. You go to lcms.org/nominate. It's going to ask you for a little bit of information about yourself. You'll have to do the kind of hinky internet thing, of, okay, tell us your email address, and then we'll send you a secret code. You can log in. It's kind of fun, you're into that sort of thing. So you got to go jump through that hoop so that we can definitely understand who's contacting us. And we'll ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, including what's your congregation. And if we'd ever have a question, we could contact your pastor or that. But obviously, usually we don't have a cause to do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's open really that far. And, we're looking for a broad spate of people with skills that a district president or a pastor might not even be aware of, but that you might know as somebody sitting in the pew or having served on a church board with or working with somebody, hey, that guy knows something about worker benefit plans.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should send his nomination up to the Synod to be used for something.
Yeah. So, it really seems like the goal here is to give you, the members of the LCMS, the opportunity to really kind of direct the way the Synod's going in a really substantial way.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll probably talk, I think, a little later on, what some of these positions are and what their duties are, what kind of people we need to fill them. But we want to cast as wide a net as possible here, because many of those skill sets are things that we don't train pastors to do. I wasn't trained to know about corporate governance or,
it just comes naturally to you. Is that what it is?
Well, it's, as I mentioned, a little crazy.
This divine revelation.
Yeah. Different spiritual gifts or non-spiritual gifts, I guess, distributed as the Lord wills. But we have to cast that wide net to find those sorts of folks, because our boards are operating in that nexus of theological fidelity and corporate competence.
Mm-hmm.
And we need the whole package there.
So going back a little bit, you said you had around 450 nominations, around 350 of the applicants, agreed to it, and then you end up with about 140 names. So what is the Committee on Nominations doing when they review these nominations that come in?
Right.
And as they select the names that go on the list, which ones do they select? What are they looking at, I guess?
Yeah. So the Office of Secretary has been charged for many, many years with doing the preliminary work for the Committee for Convention Nominations. They're elected these days by alternatingly 17 or 18 of the districts, roughly half the districts do it each time. They're half lay people, half church workers or ordained or commissioned ministers. And that pool, they really only meet once, which is kind of remarkable. They come together in mid-January here in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of sequester them at a hotel and give them, traditionally it's been about 4 banker boxes full of printed material. It's still something that's easier for them to do on paper, even though the front end is all electronic today, of files on all the nominees. And they're sorted. They have master files of show me all the ordained, all the commissioned, all the lay, if they have to go really deep searching for someone. But they also have a folder for, a given board that will show them who's been nominated and have the full packets for each person that's in there. And those packets include first the nomination forms that have come in. So if I say, Roy Askins would be good for Commission on Theology, Church Relations, I can sit down, go on to lcms.org/nominate, go to the online form. I'll fill that out. And it'll ask things about me as the nominator. It'll ask my impressions of you. Why do I think you'd be good for something at the Synod? Do I think you're a credit to the Synod? like your theology's okay. There's a kind of a matrix of skills. Does he have financial skills? Does he have skills working on a board, working with people, settling disputes, all kind of stuff. And then there are a couple questions about, how do you know this person? How well do you know this person? That sort of thing. That form, when it comes into me, it kicks off a chain of activity. One of the first things that happens is a bio form will then go to the nominee, where it says, congratulations, you've been nominated for whatever, provide links so you can get some information on what does this commission do. And then it'll ask you some questions. What's your kind of personal history in the synod, in the district, in the congregation, out in the broader community? What's your profession? What's your education? And, some other odds and ends, things like that. There's also the sniff test, which is really fun. That was added.
Is it like legit called the sniff test?
That was an invention of my enlightened predecessor, Dr. Hartwig. I might have had a hand maybe in it when I was in the Commission on Constitutional Matters. But we had a hard time at the time, still do, finding regents to elect for our universities. And so the supplemental nominee information form was invented because the convention asked us, put in the bylaws, anybody that gets nominated for anything needs to be sniffed for whether they could possibly be a regent. And so you'll get some questions about that of do you have skills particular to higher education governance, connections to universities and all that kind of thing. And that's so even if you weren't nominated for those positions, if the Committee for Convention Nominations is short on commission ministers to serve on XYZ Board of Regents, which is often the case, or commission ministers have a real opportunity there to get on a Board of Regents, because often that category, for whatever reason, is short, probably because most of them are busy teaching school, don't have time to go to more meetings. But, they've got opportunity to get on there if they fill out their sniff and have the appropriate skills. Anyway, so the bioforms come in to us. If you say, yeah, I might be willing to do that, then we'll go out to the evaluators. So the nominator provides a couple of additional evaluators. The nominee provides a couple of evaluators. And then there are some automatic evaluators. You're depending on who you are, your district president, your circuit visitor, maybe an ed exec or something, maybe your pastor. And if you're an incumbent, probably the chairman of your board, your executive, that sort of stuff. So we go out then with a round of forms to those people, and they provide that information for us. And all that gets put together into the packet that committee's going to have a look at and weigh you against the other people that are there, the other nominees.
Okay. So and then they do all this in January is when they then weigh and evaluate all these as they're sequestered away in a hotel somewhere.
We collect all that stuff and then in a mad rush, dump it all for them, get it organized. I brought along.
I have to say, that's a lot to organize in like 3 or 4 months.
I brought along, well, it's crazy. Like I said, I brought along for show and tell, since no one can see what we're looking at here. A 3-ring binder, this is actually one that we give to them at that meeting, which includes the information on all the offices and just the kind of summary lists of those that have been nominated. It's almost like in remember the old green and white lined computer paper? You got kind of 2 lines to describe each person.
Yeah.
I mean, that gives you an idea of the amount of information they're dealing with. In that condensed form, it fills up a book like this. So it's a big project, fun project. I've served on that in 2013 and enjoyed it.
So we have nominations. We come up with about 140 names that go on these nomination lists. There's also a pool. You mentioned a pool, and this pool is important for a number of different reasons.
Yeah. So the 140, roughly, those are the ones that wind up going on the actual ballot. And the ballot is important. And it's really the principal output of the Committee for Convention Nominations. It is possible for folks to get nominated from the floor at the convention. If the body of the convention kind of feels, there's not somebody I want to vote for on that ballot, which we don't like to see happen because it kind of throws things into a panic at the convention to get the proper information put together for those folks that have been floor nominated, to give a fair opportunity to people to get an idea, to know who they are. But it can happen. Sometimes a committee, is a little lopsided one way or another, and a decent proportion of the convention feels There's not really somebody that is my choice here.
You mentioned a nomination can happen from the floor in
Yes.
convention. Who can make a nomination? Who can nominate from the floor?
The voting delegates can make a nomination from the floor, and there are forms and procedures for that. But it's more difficult if the individual is not in the pool. So the pool is the pool of all the people whose names have been submitted to the Committee for Convention Nominations for anything before that October 18th.
Because you have all that data
We've
already
got
gathered,
In
assembled.
theory, we
Yeah.
have the data, assembled. I suppose interestingly, even if they declined the nomination, we don't have information on them. They're still in the pool. It's of the making of laws. There is no end. But the pool is interesting for that reason. It's interesting also for the reason of the sniff test, that anybody that's in the pool gets tested and is kind of made available. And their names now are going to be made available through the triennium, through the Concordia University system, as a resource for the universities themselves, for districts, and for CUS, as they look to appoint additional regents, because not all the regents are elected by the convention, the Synod convention.
So being in the pool opens up a whole bunch of different
So
opportunities.
being in the pool gets your name, through the gateway, as one might say, into, this realm of service for the Synod.
Which then helps us understand why 450 names is so important in many ways.
And it's not enough. I mean, when I think of 5,800 congregations, I'd have to believe that more than 1 in 10 of those has someone in the congregation that has gifts to offer for regulating the work of the Synod in some respect. I would venture to guess that every one of our congregations has somebody that could probably be useful for something.
Well, let's talk about that. So, when you're looking, let's say, Ava Maria, my daughter, is out there and she's looking for people to nominate. What should she be looking for in terms of, I want to nominate somebody for this role? What should she be looking for?
So some of the things are, and there is a document actually that talks a little bit about this in broad strokes at that same lcms.org/nominate page. There's a call for nominations document, which has a memo from me on the front. You can skim through that. But then after that, there's a description of each of the offices that's up for nomination and some general guidance to nominators and nominees. So I'll mention just a few things, but the scoop is all up there. There are things that are common to all the offices. I think a solid Christian person with a good understanding of the faith and just a good adult ability to operate and live in the faith is so important for these positions for two reasons. One, to understand the significance of the things that are governed for the broader life of the church. And the other is more internal, just simply to enable those kind of relationships on a board or on a commission or with a staff that allow things to move forward in a good churchly. We need people that can relate to each other as Christians on these boards and in a responsible way, in a way that is in the best interest of the whole church. So that's kind of a basement level sort of a thing. From there, it kind of depends on what the responsibilities of the particular office, board, or commission might be. Guess what the most popular items for nominations for ordained ministers are?
I don't have a clue.
Most popular items?
What does every pastor want to be nominated to?
CTCR?
Okay, CTCR is a big one. We get plenty of nominations for that one. The other one is the seminary boards of regents.
Really?
Because everybody thinks they know how to do seminary better than seminaries do, right? So what better chance to do that?
To demonstrate it, yes, right.
But my point is, there are those positions that require, especially for the ordained ministers, a particular level of theological acumen. And so CTCR would be one of those, the seminary boards of regents, where those ordained members may be looked to provide, a lot of the guidance from a governance perspective as to how we're shaping these individuals. Other types of boards call for other things. The Synod Board of Directors, for example, which I serve on, we have the president who handles the ecclesiastical side stuff. We've got the mission boards that are charged with kind of helping to govern how national, international mission go. The board of directors is charged principally with property, business, and legal concerns. And so you might know a layperson who's a good Christian lawyer who's been maybe involved on a board of a nonprofit or done some other kind of corporate work where they understand how a corporation carries out its finances, reports as a nonprofit, how it understands its legal obligations. So they're kind of more specialized roles that way that get into things that we think of as secular vocations or secular aptitudes, but nonetheless have our place in making the things that the church does in the world go forward in a good way.
While we're talking about and kind of shifting over to this conversation about boards and how they function, first, a really simple question. Can you explain the difference between a board of regents, a board of directors, or a board of trustees?
Well, in a legal sense, these are all really this kind of the same thing.
That's what I was wondering.
A board of trustees is typically with regard to specifically a trust, which is kind of a limited sort of a corporation. And regents we use more for our educational institutions. That it kind of has that connotation. But legally, the board of regents of one of our educational institutions, or the board of control, as it used to be known at a former time in the bylaws, legally they are the directors.
Okay,
That's who helped form KFUO.
Really?
Yeah, the board of control. Yeah.
Wow, that's great.
That's how long ago that we used that terminology.
That's right.
What sort of time commitments are we talking about when you're nominating somebody for a position like this and these type of roles? I mean, the board of directors for Synod, I've seen their dockets. Those things are huge sometimes, right? What sort of time commitments are we, as we're looking for nominating folks, like what sort of time commitments
One would want to be a rapid reader, right? The ability to skim and digest and pull out the important nuggets from this meeting, 638 pages so far, just in the main docket.
Yeah.
Plus an appointments docket's probably a couple hundred pages, and reports from agencies, another 120 some, I think it was this time. So one has to be adept at digesting information. That's not exactly Dostoevsky. It's not in novel form. But yeah, it is a commitment. Our board of directors, for example, we meet 4 times a year. We do meet generally in person. And it's about a day and a half meeting, but every board member does committee service. And every committee meets quarterly at least. So, that's another few hours each quarter at least actually in meeting, plus many, many hours, I would imagine, digesting material and mulling things over, researching stuff.
So a committee would be a subset of the board, or a subset of the board with additional people involved? Like what would it, how would
a committee of the board of directors is a subset of the board, sometimes augmented by some staff. So we presently have 3 chief standing committees: the governance committee, the finance and audit committee, and the personnel committee. And different standard items are routed to those committees first for some kind of study or action. Governance committee, for example, is charged with maintaining the board's policy manual. And so every quarter they're reviewing the board's policy manual and bringing changes that need to be made, or sometimes handling topics that arise where new policy needs to be generated or something needs to be looked at.
Gotcha.
So even within a particular board or commission, Commission on Theology and Church Relations also has subcommittees within it. Even within a board or commission, there are specializations, niches for people with particular skills.
What boards would you say are the most intensive, like labor? Like how would you kind of rank the overall workload of the various boards?
Well, that's a great question. I have the most intimate knowledge, of course, of the Synod Board of Directors, serving on that and taking the minutes of it. And that seems pretty intensive from writing it all down, which is maybe another point, just kind of a side thing. But, the minutes of our board, the Board of Directors, and of many of our other entities too, they are available to members of the Synod, to Synod congregations or pastors that can request them, or can find even the BOD minutes we post just for anybody on the internet. And if you want to familiarize yourself with what's going on at a board, or perhaps if you really want to, if you've been nominated for something and really want to stand out as a impressive nominee, to have some idea of what the thing does, is pretty good.
Well, and let me encourage those of you listening. I mean, you should really look these things up. We use these when we're writing reporter articles on what goes on with the board and what the board's doing. There's a lot of information in there that's actually quite helpful to understanding what the board of directors does and how the Synod is operating and functioning.
And to understand the reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we as I said, you know, and kind of jokingly, right, that every pastor knows better than even the seminary that he went to, how a seminary should train pastors. You know, we all are natural experts in everything until we find out that the thing is actually hard. And, you know, to wrestle a little bit just with what the boards of regents, the board of directors, mission boards, with the whole scope of what they're charged with maintaining for the synod. You know, it's interesting to see new board members coming in and think they'll fix everything and realize, you know, this is a much more complex and team-oriented fixing activity than I thought it was going to.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are those resources out there. Board of directors is pretty demanding. The colleges and universities and seminaries, you know, I think those boards also are very active. They have quite a scope of responsibility. I mean, you think about running a university, especially, which is beholden not only to the synod, which kind of founded it and holds it as its own, and it exists to serve the purposes of the synod, the mission of the church, but also responsible to all its students and faculty, a broader community with a whole lot of needs, a lot of regulation from the federal government and from others, creditors, some pretty demanding financial situations often. That's a lot for a regent to shoulder, and God bless the folks that take that on. You know, but it is a commitment, but I'll say also generally kind of a fun one. I mean, there are definitely times that are hard, but the ability to be part of a team that is making a difference for the church and trying to see that the institutions the church has built over the years are regulated to serve the gospel in the day-to-day, and regulated in such a way that they're going to continue to serve future generations. It can be an exciting thing to be part of.
I can imagine. I did a little bit of work with a very small board in Hong Kong. It was a nonprofit that we'd set up, and it was really neat to kind of see how everything was operating and run, and
Right.
and kind of help guide that in a godly way. It was very exciting.
For sure.
We've moved on to talk a little bit about regents for the CUS. You mentioned they're hard to find. Do you have any reasons why? Like, is there anything popping out in terms of why they might be particularly difficult in terms of finding them instead of, say, like, you know, the board director for synod or something?
Right. I mean, one of the reasons is that the synod, and I think wisely, quite a number of years ago, established some particular requirements to be a university regent. Interestingly, we did not apply them to the seminary regents. Maybe because we think the seminaries are operationally a little less complicated. But it's just one of these interesting conundra of, you know, the making of laws, there is no end. They don't have to make sense. They're just the law. But there are specific requirements. You have to have a certain number of a certain list of aptitudes, which include things like, you know, financial aptitude or a legal skill or human resources knowledge, you know, higher education governance experience. Because those boards are answerable not only to the synod, but also to accreditors and to regulators, you know, they really need to be the caliber of folks that can govern a university, that won't just, you know, we're not looking just for cheerleaders. We're not looking just for donors. We're not looking just for people to keep the required 12 or however many seats around the table full while we do what we're going to do anyway. We're looking for folks that can critically engage even with a very skilled and very capable executive, a president of an institution and a faculty, and actively work at making them better, challenging them to improve the institution, even in difficult circumstances. And so that takes a special caliber of person. And so the committee, I think, is careful, you know, to try to screen those candidates. They're also screened by the CUS now. It used to be a screening that I and the president of the CUS would perform. Now the CUS board of directors is going to be responsible for screening those regent nominees. But that's one reason. I think it's also kind of a daunting thing for a lot of people to think of, you know, serving as a regent, being responsible for governing, you know, which is not something we have a lot of native experience with. We're much more comfortable being governed, much more used to it anyway, than actually stepping into that governing role, which is is tricky. It's stepping outside of yourself in a certain way.
Does that stepping into this role of governing an institution like this bear with it additional burdens beyond simply the idea that I have to do this work now?
Yeah.
But are there other fiduciary responsibilities, anything else like this that devolves onto or kind of rests on the regents when they do this?
Absolutely. For those that are members of boards or officers of corporations, there's a legal or ethical concept of fiduciary duty.
Mm-hmm.
And the fiduciary is someone who guards the foetus, the trust, the deposit for someone else. So you're not there as you and for your own purposes and to make the seminary crank out guys that are just like you were, or worse. You're there to see that the seminary, the college, university, the publishing house, whatever, is serving the needs of the whole synod. These things are synod institutions. And so you are the trustee, if you want to use that term, of a sacred trust, a legal trust and a sacred trust, which even in a legal sense implies the duties of care, of loyalty, and of obedience. Those are the classical fiduciary duties, that you're legally responsible for carrying out. The duty of care, that you're there exercising the level of care that an ordinary prudent person would. Mm-hmm. If you're given financials, you're evaluating those financials and not just trusting that the executive says all's well, but you're looking at the audits, you're looking at the quarterlies, you're asking questions about stuff that doesn't make sense. And if you're not doing the job of a director, a regent. Mm-hmm. And that's something that's incredibly important. All our folks are doing as directors, and we all have those skills to one level or another, or in different areas. Not everybody has to be a financial whiz kid on that board, but you need enough of them that when you're not asking the right questions. Mm-hmm. So the board members can support each other in that respect. The duty of loyalty, that your loyalty is to the institution you serve, to the college, university, seminary, the synod that's behind and in and through it. It's kind of this perichoruses of the synod mm-hmm. through everything, and not to your own purposes. You're not cutting the carpet cleaning contract to your cousin, mm-hmm. Just to enrich him at the expense of the university. You're not looking out for various special interests, but you're trying to promote the good of the whole. And then the duty of obedience, which is sometimes, even though we're used to being governed more than governing, obedience doesn't come naturally. to learn and understand what's the role I've been given, and to carry that out without getting into somebody else's stuff. To say, well, the bylaws of the synod, the bylaws of my organization, the laws of my state tell me this is my job, and I'm gonna do that even when it's hard. So those things, if you're a thinking person, if you engage with the task, there's a burden there that goes beyond the hours of reading or sitting in meetings to you're shouldering an actual duty, mm-hmm. Which is not oppressive, and somebody's got to do it, and it's good. I mean, we can go into it with the zeal of a young Marine, right, and take the beachhead, and it's great, but it's not nothing.
So, I mean, could we describe part of the responsibility of, a trustee or a director or a regent as knowing, once again, the constitution, bylaws of the organization, knowing the rules of the government, and then comparing the actions of the institution over against these things to ensure that they're continuing to remain in accord with these?
Right. Yeah. The kind of regulative function of a governing body is really important. And some of our boards, like our boards of regents, are explicitly charged with making sure that their documents and policies are in order with what the synod has established the thing to do. So mm-hmm. that's huge. But yes, that is a big piece of governance. It's not all of governance, though, because governance is not just kind of a passive audit function, mm-hmm. Or a kind of a passive monitoring function, but also a guiding function that's asking the right questions, that's prompting the right studies and developments to try to move the institution forward in the mission that it's been given. Mm-hmm. And maybe the obedience comes in there in the mission that it's been given too, that, if I've got a university, a publishing house or whatever, I'm not out to make it successful some other way, mm-hmm. but to make it actually fulfill the church's purposes and bear fruit for our congregations, through what it's doing. But yeah, those two pieces, kind of the regulative piece, important, but then the really, governing is in keeping the train moving forward, keeping the boiler hot, is also there too.
Would you say it's fair maybe to compare somewhat to school accreditation? In school accreditation, we go through this process to make sure that we are, as a school, who we say we are and doing what we say we do.
Right.
So there's some accountability in that sense. So many of these boards and committees are serving that form of accountability, not necessarily just to be mean watchdogs, but to so that we can be held accountable to ourselves for being who we say we are and doing what we say we do.
Yeah, I think there's some really nice analogies with that process, and one of those is that the accreditors are not there to run your school. They're to help you see how to run your school better, right? If they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. and a board is something like that. A board, that tries to get down into the weeds of managing everything and, really doing the job of an executive or a director or even the staff below. Its head is down. It's not able to really govern the institution. If you manage everything, you can govern nothing. And so that's a really key aspect of a board, keeping its head up in governance, knowing what it has to monitor to see that folks are accountable to the tasks that the board has put them there for, but also giving them the tools and then stepping back and saying, okay, now go and execute on this. And we'll have questions for you, without trying to just do it all itself, because there's nothing crazier than, 8, 12 people trying to be the executive collectively, for an organization.
Executive by committee.
12-headed calves don't live too long.
So suppose we have a nominee we think has, say financial skills and could really be a benefit to a board, but they've never served on a committee before or anything like this, a board. Is there training available? Like, does the Synod, when this person comes into the board, do they receive training in terms of how they're supposed to be doing this or not? Or how does that work out?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit. The scope of that training depends a little bit on the particular position. But all the folks that are newly elected to a position with the Synod, there's kind of a general orientation that the president's office holds after the convention at about the time of the installation in September, where folks are invited to come in and visit not only with us, but with one another, and get to know their class of incoming people and to begin to be introduced to the challenges in broad strokes. For our colleges and universities, the regents have specific training, part of which is offered by the board of directors and has to do with fulfilling bylaw functions, and CUS helps out with that as well. Part of that is done by the board of regents and has to do with kind of general board skills, and then the particular financial and operational realities of governing a university. So there are those kind of on-ramp opportunities. There are also good opportunities out in the district. So we're talking about Synod elected offices. Every district has a board of directors that deals on a smaller scale, but nonetheless a significant one, with some of the same kind of questions that we see at the Synod level. There are also other opportunities, at the district level or in other places to gain some experience. But I'd say those, district venues, and then just kind of having a look at, requesting minutes, reading the reports that are in the convention workbook when that comes out from each of the agencies, and getting an idea of what's going on, what are kind of the things that are on the radar the boards and commissions are needing to deal with.
I kind of want to move to a little bit more of the why now, why boards and commissions, and kind of the historical framework for how we got to this point where we have all of these boards and commissions that need people to fill them. You can imagine somebody in the pew listening to this podcast saying, St. Paul didn't have a board of directors to direct his work. Why do we have this now? Like, why are we at this point? Why do we have these type of structures?
Right.
I realize it's a huge question.
Yeah.
But it's a podcast, so we can go as long as we need to. Right?
Yeah, there you go. You're bringing snacks at a certain point. But, it is something that runs back to the beginning of the Synod, the having of these things. And it's sort of interesting that the boards, in many cases, preceded the board. So the board of directors, there kind of really wasn't one at the very beginning of the Synod.
Okay.
But we had a bunch of boards that were charged with doing specific things, specific missions, specific functions, some of which have now passed from necessity. There was a railroad secretary and a board of transportation or something like this that dealt with schlepping people around to conventions on, trying to get railroad tickets and line up railroad tickets for the circuit preachers that we had running out to places like Montana when there weren't congregations out there.
Wow.
And so some of these things have passed to glory. But in the history of the Synod, there were many, many more boards in the past than there are today.
I believe it wasn't in 1965 where they merged. I want to say there was like 10 different boards that got merged into one board for foreign missions or something like that.
Yeah, in this, there was an enormous period of growth from about the 20s until about the 60s, and then some kind of reality started to set in that every man, woman, and child in the Synod, can't be pressed into service on 3 committees. So they trimmed back a little bit, and even more recently, before 2010, which now I know is ancient history. But before 2010, there were more boards than we have now. Now we have board of directors, we have national mission, we have international mission, but there were things like the board for communication services, and the board for congregation and district services, and board for mission services. There were boards that had somewhat more specific purposes and that really had more sway within their pieces of the budget and domains of operations than we have now. We've kind of trimmed down. But I think that trimming makes it all the more important that the folks that we have on the boards that have continued to exist bring the knowledge and insight and, I would say, conversational outreach into the whole Synod that we need to be able to make good decisions at this level. If you think about the Board for National Mission, you've got 2 members, essentially. There's some other advisories and so on, but 2 voting members from each region of the Synod. So it's 10 folks. You think of the number of functions that are grouped under that board, and think of trying to make discipleship resources, outreach resources, stewardship resources that really reach and supply the needs of the whole scope of congregations that we have in the Synod, from congregations of 20 members up to congregations of thousands of members. Geographical areas that have really quite different ways of life, ways of getting around, ways of people relating to one another. In your evangelism stuff, it's going to make a difference if you drive past more people than cows, getting to church. If you're in the New England district and the Montana district have about the same number of congregations, same number of people in them, but their reach to people in their communities is extraordinary. I couldn't even reach that many cows when I was in Montana. So, trying to cover the bases and have a Synod that's able to serve the whole Synod, it takes the ingenuity, the cooperation, the interplay, the fruitful discussion of more than just, one executive that you've brought in to run the thing.
Yeah. You've mentioned the board of directors and the board for national mission, board for international mission. Can you briefly articulate how they relate to each other, how those 3 boards kind of function, interact, and then we'll kind of dig into, say, like board for national mission and the various functions that roll up under it and why you want this kind of broad range of expertise.
Right. Yeah. What's sort of interesting, since 2010 is that the boards are of different kinds. The Synod Board of Directors is a governing board. It deals with property, legal, business matters for all of corporate Synod and to some extent for all of Synod. The 2 mission boards are mission boards, which are defined differently. They don't actually direct all that much. Their members are not really directors, but they do monitor the function of the offices of national and international mission. They can develop certain policies that govern how those offices function. And in that, they have some directive freight, some governing authority. I will say both boards are still kind of figuring out what that role means.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are in 2025. We put this in place in 2010. It's taken some time to kind of figure out relative to, the executives and relative to the budgetary control of the board of directors, what are these boards really doing? It's not the same as in the old days when those boards were governing boards themselves. So they're kind of more policy and monitoring boards than the board of directors is. They do have some specific functions, especially on the board for international missions side, where they are governing, sending, releasing missionaries. They're kind of making actual operational decisions at the recommendation of the Office of International Mission. But they have some of those additional functions that have just been assigned to them as the board that manages the missionary population of the Synod.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a distinction of roles. The mission boards certainly are much more on the mission side, engaged in questions about, how do we carry out the church's mission? What's the content of our materials? What's our approach and outreach? Whereas the board of directors, I won't say, it's kind of the cold, hard facts. There is a lot that they do that deeply impacts the mission of the Synod, but it's limited to that more mechanical, abstracted sense from how are we going to carry out the church's mission.
So this is why, when you're looking for nominees for the BIM and BNM in particular, you're looking for a wide range of experiences.
Yes.
Because once again, you're looking for somebody who can represent the fields of Montana as well as, the streets of the Atlantic District.
Right. And we have the regional representation, so at least the 5 regions of the Synod are represented on those two, but the ability to not only to bring one's personal experiences, but to understand the experience and perspective of others and to be able to integrate those into a way that moves the thing forward together.
So over the years, have you seen nominations generally increasing or decreasing?
They ebb and flow a little bit. On the presidential side, it ebbs and flows much more violently, kind of depending on how enthused people are about a presidential election one way or another. It seems easier for people to focus on who's the big guy, but the big guy doesn't do everything.
Yeah.
And these nominations, we were in a pretty steady decline until last time. Last time we saw a little bit of an increase, which we were grateful for. This time we've got the new electronic system, but it seems we're kind of fighting the downward trend again. And, that threat of disengagement, it really does threaten our life together as a Synod. And this is one of the areas where I think it threatens us the most, not getting the pile of names that we should for that committee to be maybe forced to go through to, in a sense, free them from their preconceptions too, and look at a wide range of candidates that have a wide range of skill sets and abilities, and shake their preconceptions about who do I want to put on this board. We've got an embarrassment of riches here. What's the best we can do for the Synod?
Make it concrete. When you say it really threatens our life together, how do you see that really being threatened by this lack of nominations, the lack of people bringing forth these names? Why is that dangerous?
Yeah, well, I mean, how do you feel about Social Security?
Not so great.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll have to put this in the director's cut. It's one of those things that's there. None of us is too enthused about it till we get a check. And when we get the check, all we care about is the check keeps coming. I don't care what the thing does, as long as it's doing the thing I want. And that's not the way to engage with your church. And it's not something, historically that's made Social Security work all that well in this country, the forgotten thing that we feed every once in a while and cry about when it isn't doing what we want. We don't want the church to become that. And the Synod really is, the whole thing is a completely voluntary organization. And I don't know that folks think about all that much, but there's nothing that keeps a congregation in the Synod. I mean, we won't come take your property if you decide to leave. We're not gonna be able to boot your pastor and put someone else in there, send someone down from St. Louis. If your guy's not doing what we think he should, he's your pastor. And we can't tax you. That's been true since the very beginning. CFW Walther had a dim view of taxes, And although there was a tax on church workers, they had to subscribe to the Lutheran Witness sort of thing. So we might want to bring that back.
I'm on board with that. I'm
no,
okay with that.
Save that for the director's cut. There was that, so they had to pay for the publications and district convention stuff and a bunch of things. But that aside, it was like $1, right? Which was probably a lot.
That's
then.
a lot, yeah.
Yeah, but it was probably a chunk of a book too. They were a little more prolix at that time. Anyway, that we've never taxed our congregations. Congregations give to their districts, the districts give to the synod, and by assembling a whole lot of other gifts, we're able to do a whole lot of stuff. But we tend to forget that, and as congregations, disengage from the synod and lose not just the feeling, but the reality that this is their synod, and they have input into what's happening, and they're guiding what the synod is doing, not only for them, but for 5,800 congregations like them that need the fundamental things the synod was put there to provide. It's, a place to work on doctrinal unity, a place to do the things that are bigger than any congregation can do itself, like provide pastors and do mission work in new areas, to provide hymnals and catechisms and all this kind of stuff that the church doesn't think about all the time, but needs. When the congregations feel that they're kind of losing that, or it's just becoming a function out there somewhere like Social Security, they hope it's there when they need another pastor, but it's not really theirs. They're not really actively governing it. We lose the day-to-day interest in supporting these institutions and in keeping them true to their roots. We force our institutions to think about survival rather than service. And that's a dangerous thing to do to the institutions that ultimately the church long-term relies upon. Your congregation will make it for a few weeks without the synod, a few years probably. If you stop getting handbooks, you're probably not going to complain some of you will. I appreciate it. But eventually there is a reason the congregations formed the synod, built all these wonderful institutions, have invested all this money and time and effort and people's lives into doing this stuff. And that is that the long-term welfare of the church needs it. So my plea for engagement, I guess, as we withdraw from that, as we think, it's not important that I think about sending someone to help govern the synod. It's not important that I send someone to determine, how our common resources are spent and stewarded. Well, we're just losing our interest in participating in the whole thing. And that's a shame, because it is the congregation's synod. It's not mine or the president's or, even the people that have been elected to all the offices or put in all the positions here at the International Center or wherever they are. It's the congregation's synod. And, like every executive needs good directors that help him be better at what he's doing. Each one of us that's in office needs the whole synod to be engaged in looking at what we're up to and saying, hey, you could have done better there. Hey, we're relying on you. We're keeping an eye on you. We want you to do well, but we're going to hold you responsible. That's healthy. And it's good.
As we think about this and to really bring this back home to me as the listener back home and what's my next step, there are a number of committees and boards for which we're seeking nominations.
Right.
On those boards and committees, some of them are lay, some of them are commissioned church workers, some of them are ordained. I don't know if there are other categories as well.
Right.
Help me think about this and who I might be nominating. Some commission workers, teachers, deaconesses, ordained ministers, pastors, professors. I don't know what all the requirements are.
There's a wide spate of opportunities. In that document that I pointed you to earlier on lcms.org/nominate, the call for nominations document, on that webpage, it's a little cluttered, but there are some kind of, yellowish gold boxes, maybe orange boxes. I'm kind of colorblind, so web colors is, I have to look at the little codes and figure out what the numbers mean. But in one of those boxes is that LCMS.org, the call for nominations memo, and then what I call the officer board and commission document that lists out exactly what you're asking for. For each position that's up this time, you'll see a list of the folks that are in those seats. The seats that are up for election this time will be marked with the 26 because this is a 26 convention. And those that are filled with someone who is termed out, who's not eligible to do another term, have an asterisk. So you can easily see on there not only what seats are possibly open, but what seats really are open and we really need nominations for, and somebody's got a good shot at getting in there because there's not an incumbent to contend with. Of course, not all incumbents continue. So we will take nominations for anything. But you'll see in there, and it will break out by ordained, commissioned, lay. For some of them, like the Commission on Theology and Church Relations, it specifies we need a parish pastor or a parish teacher. And those are quite specific because the CTCR is looking to have voices there from those specific domains. Is what we're producing as a commission, going to play in Cincinnati? Is it gonna work when it's actually taught in confirmation class, when it's taught in a parish classroom? So, and then the other breakdown, I would say, are those offices that are regional, where it doesn't matter where you are as the nominator, but the nominee has to be within and has to serve within the region for that position. If it's on one of the mission boards or some of the seats on the board of directors are regional, they need to be in that area. Again, with the concern that we get the interests and concerns and perspectives of the whole synod rolled in there. For the ordained positions, we're looking at pastors, professors, whatever positions a person is in. If a person is in an elected position in the synod or district that he's not likely to leave, you can only serve one elected position at a time. And the one that kind of surprises people often is circuit visitors. We've got 600 and some circuit visitors. That's an elected office in the district. So if you're going to be on some other board or, the holy grail of the theology and church relations or seminary, something, you're going to have to give up your circuit visitor duty, in order to do. So bylaws 151, 1511, and 1512 go into the gory details. They're also in that document that I talked about. If you're an employee of the synod or the district, there's some rules there too about what things you can serve on. Although faculty are a little bit freer in their service than others because the synod said one convention, we're afraid if we don't let faculty be on boards, we'll run out of people to put on boards. That was when we had more boards. The commission workers, teachers, DCEs, DCMs, the whole array, deaconesses, the whole array of commission service. Sometimes the teachers, because the classroom is somewhat demanding for at least 9-10 months of the year, it's a little more challenging for them to get away for service. And I think they are still the bulk of our commissioned roster, active commission roster. And we struggle a little bit to ply them away from those roles to serve. Some pretty commonly on a district board of directors, they'll have that input there, which is hugely important. But those that are able to serve, retirees, those that have a little bit more liberty in their work time, absolutely. Tee them up.
Very good. Thanks.
Do you have any other questions, Andy? I have one left, but...
All you.
Okay. Last question I always ask is there anything I should have asked that I didn't think to ask? Anything you'd like to say that should be on the record regarding nominations?
Well, my last chance in the deposition here. I think we covered, the ground pretty well. I had prepared for some crazy historical questions just a little bit, like how long have we had a committee for convention nominations, which this actually kind of surprised me.
Really? How long have we had a committee for
It's had different
CCM?
names, but it goes back to 1899.
Oh, wow.
So
that's in terms of long-lived boards, that's probably one of the most long-lived. I mean, it's not quite as long as the Lutheran Witness, oldest Lutheran Witness.
Yeah, it's not quite as long as the board of directors, but it's up there.
Yeah. Wow.
And its composition has changed a little bit over time, and it wasn't until at 1989, I think it was, that we got the way of getting it that we currently have. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, it was elected by the previous convention. Mm-hmm. Still had kind of a regional component. But then in the late 80s, we said, okay, let's draw from half the districts at a time and put it together this way. And it was also at that time that it was really opened up for anybody in any pew in the synod to be able to send a nomination to the thing. Mm. And so that I think is something to celebrate and something for everybody who's listening to go and check out lcms.org/nominate. We now have an electronic system to handle these, so I can handle the onslaught if you actually take that up with zeal. So,
Thank you, Dr. Sias. Appreciate your time. Thank you, Andy, for joining us also. And thank you to all of you who took the time to listen to the Lutheran Witness podcast and how to nominate people to serve on boards and commissions and committees here in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. As always, we're here to help you learn how to interpret the world from a Lutheran perspective, even when you're nominating.